Welcome back to the Former Fans podcast. I'm glad you're here for this episode because I've got my new friend, Paul Poteat, here from Campus Outreach, and you're going to get to hear just two guys having a conversation about the sexual brokenness that is all through ministries, all through churches, all through the world. And man, what we're trying to do to see God rectify that. So, Paul, man, thanks for being here. How you feeling about kind of these taboo conversation subjects that we're about to dive into?
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Tyler. I'm excited about it. I would say that the Freedom Fight program and kind of engaging in the conversation when it comes to sexual sin, sexual addiction, sexual recovery, and restoration. Um, I'm a little bit more recent to the game, probably just the last year that I've really been dialed in.
Right.
But even in that short amount of time, I feel like I've had a lot of conversations and a lot of interaction and just see more and more the need to be having the conversation and to normalize things, de-shame things, and engage with other guys to really help.
And that's how we met. So we have gone through, you and your wife, through the sexual addiction discipleship leader training, right? Through the Freedom Fight. And I was on a leaders call. We have a monthly call, which is really cool, of just ministers, lay people, just people who are trying to serve God and help the church through sexual brokenness. And your wife started sharing kind of what y'all were doing on campuses. I was like writing down names. I was like, I got to email this guy. So super grateful. That's pretty cool. Tag team in it. And you guys have seen it in campus outreach, the need. The reason why we created our whole sexual wholeness team within Athletes in Action is just because we saw the, unfortunately, I'll use the word demand for
Mhm.
need for people to disciple staff. Kind of to walk us through what you've been doing with your staff. How did it come to your attention? What need
Mhm.
you see in this?
Yeah. So the role that I serve in with Campus Outreach uh, is called a network director. And what that means, that's probably what in most other ministries they would call a regional director, like someone who is helping engage staff across multiple ministries in multiple states in an area of the United States. And I'm doing that in the Midwest network for Campus Outreach. And I was talking with a colleague who does this role in the East Coast network, and he had been leading some guys through a freedom fight group, guys who were on staff with Campus Outreach, and just started sharing with me about what God was doing in their lives, about some of the just epiphanies, just the realizations that they had about not just their struggle and what recovery looked like, but just the things motivating and driving the addiction as well, and how those guys and even their local directors were writing him thank you notes, just saying, this has been a game changer. And I heard him talk about that once, and then the next time that we were together and he talked about it, I was like, all right, dude, send me the link, sign me up. I want to get certified. I want to be experiencing the same kind of opportunity to engage guys on staff or guys who are thinking about coming on staff in this regard. And so I signed up for the Freedom Fight certification program and started going through that and was sharing with my wife what I was doing. And she thought, hey, there's women who deal with this too. I'll get certified as well. So she and I kind of both went through the certification tracks together. We're on the Zoom to kind of complete that back in May. And along the way, as I was just meeting with different staff guys and they're asking, hey, what have you been doing? What are you learning? What are you thinking about? I just shared, well, I'm starting to do this. And I had a couple of guys say, actually, I need that. So can we meet? So I texted the Freedom Fight or emailed them. It was like, hey, I'm not certified, but I've got some guys that would want to meet in a group. Is it beneficial at all? Should I just wait until I've done it and then do the group, or can I kind of do them at the same time? And they said, actually, it's probably a good thing because you're kind of working through the material and you're helping these guys work through the material, and maybe that will help your retention rate and the learning and all that. So I met with a group with some guys and really saw both some of the guys experience new levels of freedom and victory, and not just over the sin, but over understanding their emotions. I mean, maybe my favorite thing about the whole program is it's what I tell people is I just don't know if there's a better accountability app.
There you go.
So, um, even for me personally, it wasn't like I've been, struggling with this sin in my own life. By the Lord's grace, that's been a place where he's really cared for me. But I feel anxious. I'm a workaholic. I get angry with my kids. I mean, there's all kinds of other addictive, escaping patterns. And just to check in on the app and everything as I'm going through the certification, I just thought, man, this is great for sexual sin, but this is good for anyone to just be aware, and maybe especially for men, because I think men do a poor job of connecting with how they're feeling and what's going on and
Oh yeah.
what things are leading up to uh, escaping, self-medicating, dopamine hit type behaviors. But the app really kind of helps you be aware of that. So we were doing that, and I met with these guys and saw, like I was saying, saw both guys grow, but then other guys who were meeting for a couple of months and then come to a place and say, I've been lying the whole time. I've been saying that I was doing well, but I'm really not. And even that to me, it's like after a month and a half of engaging at that level, sin that had been hidden for years was revealed and brought to the light because they started learning shame is what's fueling this stuff.
Exactly. Yes.
Um, and so I did that, and then I talked. When I would be at church and talk with pastors there, and they're asking, "Hey, what are you doing right now? What are you learning?" I would share this, and they're like, "I think there's guys at our church who could benefit from this. Would you want to consider this at the church?" So I have not had to really advertise in any way, shape, or form. Just bringing awareness and
Yeah.
maybe a little bit of understanding to the conversation, then people respond. So. Last thing I would say on that is currently I've finished kind of the group that I was leading in the spring, and those guys are kind of connected in other places for accountability and help. And I'm starting another group. I just told in my network the different directors, hey, this is what I did. I'd like to do another one. Do you have anyone that you would recommend for this? And I got 5 guys from across 5 different regions
That's
who are all on staff who are going to start meeting and going through this program with me. And I emailed them 2 days ago to kind of have our first Zoom to figure out times and schedule, and we're going to start next week.
let's
So it'll be
go.
a group with 5 guys.
And praise God. That's awesome. Let me give a kind of disclaimer here. You nor I, we don't work for the Freedom Fight. I mean, we do not get paid. We don't get kickbacks, nothing. But you and I have both found that what Ted and his team have created is an unbelievable resource for discipleship accountability. And
Mhm.
it's been a blessing for me. The same thing you said with those daily check ins. I'm not struggling watching porn over here, but as I'm doing these check ins just to help my guys out, to remind them, I'm going,
Yeah.
and I'm using anger to self medicate. I may not be
Mhm.
running to porn for my dopamine hit, but I'm subconsciously looking for a reason to get angry with my wife or my kids.
Mhm.
So I thought that was so good.
Yeah.
I do like to highlight to people that we don't work for Freedom Fight.
Yeah.
Check it
Yeah.
out. It's that good.
Yep. Absolutely. Like, I mean, I said it already, but I just don't know that there's a better app that helps you connect with what's going on and easily connect with other people because, you just feel I was in that group, and then I had another group with 2 guys at the church, and I can fill out one update and it goes to both those groups, and then all those guys are kind of connected and know what's going on in my life, and then I get texts, and then they give me calls or about any of those things. So I think there's a lot of ways. I think probably the majority in my mind of ways that technology can really undermine relationships and connection, but this is a way to redeem technology so
Exactly.
that it actually can do helpful things and not harmful, disconnecting things.
Yeah, there you go. So I'll leave a link down for you guys watching below of where you can sign up for the Freedom Fight. There's a community tab if you're looking for accountability. And if you're a ministry leader, I'll also leave another link that takes you and explain what the SADL, the Sex Addiction Discipleship Leader training looks like that Paul and I have both been through.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I really hope you'll check that out. Go ahead.
Yeah. And maybe on that note, anyone who's maybe doing it for the first time, I would recommend, on the app, you can do the check-in stuff, but then it's also got videos that you can watch for kind of the content. But you can buy a study guide, and that study guide goes along with the videos. And yep, there you
Okay.
have it right there. And I think if you do the videos, that's great, but it's hard if you want to refer back to some of that content to just recall it from memory. But if you have the study guide, then that kind of translates the videos into a tangible reference that you can use. So I tell guys, like I'm going to tell the guys when we meet next week for the first meeting, download the app, register for the Freedom Fight. It's all free, except you have to pay for the study guide. Go on Amazon, order the study guide. There's a book also, and the book's good, but like bare minimum, I think is the app with the study guide to really get the most out of it.
Agreed. That's what we do. It's exactly what I do with my guys. Actually, this morning, one of the first staff groups that I had, we had our DTR. We defined the relationship. I've taken the whole guys through the program, and they've all said, "Man, we definitely want to continue this group and doing the check-ins." And then we study the word together. So we've gone through the videos all together. We've gone through the study guide, but now we're still doing the daily check-ins on the app. And then when our weekly call happens, we do a weekly check-in and commitment to change, and then we study the word together. Just the
Yeah.
community it brings, bro, is
Mhm.
unbelievable. Only two of the guys were on the same city. The rest of them were scattered across the country. And
Mhm.
the unity amongst them is incredible. Have you seen that with that group that you kind of just wrapped up with?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that guys probably have a hard time connecting because it takes time for our heads to access our hearts.
Yeah.
But what the app does, and even the weekly check-in, is in order to kind of come prepared, you have to review some of your check-ins and then kind of reflect over what's been going on in your life leading up to the time that you would connect. So that just means all the guys come in having processed and written down how they've been doing and what's been going on. So I think it just, instead of guys being like, oh yeah, good question, let me think about that. It's like, boom, there it is. And
Yeah.
I think men particularly need help there.
Yeah.
So
And you mentioned earlier that we all struggle. I don't know what it is about men, our parents, their parents before them. We never understood our emotions. I mean, it was suck it up, which in a lot of ways, guys should suck it up. But then it
mhm,
was it was also the only, in my experience, the only emotion that was celebrated was anger because it brought results, whether in sports
mhm,
or
yeah,
in business, or like I'm just gonna get mad and get it done. And
mhm,
man, we don't know how to process what's
yeah,
going on,
yeah,
how we're feeling. And I don't know if you guys, I imagine you are seeing it on your campuses, and especially with your younger staff, the anxiety and depression is through the roof. And then you couple that where they're trying to medicate that with pornography.
mhm,
Man, we're just seeing guys wrecked because they're in this cycle that's just
mhm,
driven by shame. Has that been your experience with your younger staff? Especially,
mhm.
it's not just a younger thing. If you and I start an addiction today, we're going to be crushed by anxiety and depression. But has that been your experience?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think it's maybe a little bit more natural and easy to say younger because the one thing that I feel like I had going for me is I didn't grow up in I'm a digital immigrant, like they didn't have an iPhone. I remember the answering machine messages that I would leave. And then when you leave the house, no one can get in touch with you. If you're not at if I mean, all through college, the only way I could be at a computer was in a computer lab.
Yeah.
And and so that's a different world from being in your dorm room by yourself all hours of the day with your phone that's high speed and has all this stuff that's accessible. So I think that is particularly challenging for younger people. And then that just makes it, I think, more difficult to access the emotions. And I would say, like, even when I was going through campus ministry, and that we would have accountability times for, struggles with pornography or relapse acting out. The challenge, was, it seemed like if we just had accountability and we just had maybe the truth of God's word, and it's like, you need to believe this more, or you need to be more honest here.
Yeah.
But it felt like there was a missing component.
Right.
And that's where what I feel like the Freedom Fight and the app kind of opens up, is that emotional understanding what's going on underneath the struggle. Because uh, it seems like the sin is not the root, but it's the fruit.
There you go.
And the root is more of these, negative emotions, or shame, or, coping mechanisms, or things like that. And there just wasn't anything designed to help you diagnose that, or be aware, or anywhere remotely close to being in tune. Maybe you could go to a counselor for that. But I think what this is doing is it's bringing those components, community and accountability, with the truth of who you are as a Christian, coupled with some deeper emotional understanding. And that seems to be kind of a secret recipe that was absent from anything prior to this that I've seen.
So cool. So you use the S word, bro. Sin. And it is what it is, a sin. And you and I kind of bonded over the pursuit of righteousness. And this is a lot of
Mhm,
my guys on, is that, man, we are going to crush sin to the glory of God. The problem with that, though, in our culture is people will start throwing out the word legalism at you, and you're
mhm,
sick. And so you're working with full-time ministers. I'm working with full-time ministers. I got local ministers reaching out to me here, full-time ministers that are struggling with pornography. And I always
mhm,
make things clear, like when I post on social media, I'm like, I work with guys who hate their sin. But when you're in an addiction and you built these habits over years, and a lot of them developing at, 11, 12, 13 years old, you
mhm,
can hate it all you want, but you can't just stop
mhm,
without connection and community, like you just said, and understanding the root of where it's coming from. So,
mhm.
man, talk a little bit about what you're doing with guys to have them pursue righteousness, because I thought that was a real cool piece, that you were excited when they reject sin, and they just run after the Lord, and they do it through Scripture.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that the challenge is when you're engaging over this with vocational ministry workers, is the fear that if I'm honest about this, what does that mean for my job?
Yeah.
And so you feel like, I can't be honest about it, so I'm going to fight it, and I'm going to put it to death, and I'm never going to do it again. This is the last time.
Yeah. How many times?
And then you do it again, and now what happened here now happens again. And this is with single guys and married guys. And I think there is another uh false belief out there that, hey, you might be dealing with this now, but once you get married, it's going to go away. And the reality is, if there's a addiction, your wife's going to go on a trip. You're gonna have certain things that trigger the struggle. And then you're not only doing full-time vocational ministry, but you're also married. And so now, to be honest, there's risk of, well, what's this going to mean for my job? What's this going to mean for the relationship with my spouse?
Yeah.
And so I can't tell anyone about it. And so then the guys are inwardly struggling, but they're outwardly painting this picture that they're a happily married
Yeah.
uh, Christian leader who's, you know, passing on wisdom to the next generation. And all the while they're living this hypocritical life.
I'm a fake. I'm a phony.
Yeah, yeah. And then what I've seen is that begins to make them say, rather than being honest about their sin, maybe I should go off staff. Maybe I don't need to be in vocational ministry. But then I think if and when that happens, yeah, maybe that alleviates that pressure, but then that also alleviates some of the negative consequences of acting out is because, well, now I'm not on staff, so it doesn't matter as much. So what I'm seeing with again, I don't have a lot of test cases, but in the few that I do have, what I'm experiencing is as hard as it is to be honest about their struggle with pornography, it's equally difficult and if not maybe more difficult and insidious to really talk about their self-righteousness because they have this image and they need to keep up this image. And so they're leading groups, they're engaging with guys on campus, they're telling them not to look at pornography, they're cracking down, and the whole time hidden and secret over here is the struggle that they can't be honest about. And then the first thing they've got to do is they've got to bring that to the light. And that means take incredible risks
Yeah.
because and that's well, they take the risk because in some instances, maybe they could lose their job. So that's why we've tried to say, hey, if you're not doing something with another person or something that is clearly illegal and
Yeah.
it's just involving pornography, then you can share and you're not going to lose, you don't have to fear losing your job. That doesn't mean they might not lose their job because obviously as we start talking about it, it might become clear,
Yeah.
hey, this isn't a good place for you, but here's why. But it's not just because it's not a one-to-one. You did this, therefore you lose your job. It might be you're doing this and it's revealing some other things that show this isn't the best place for you. But that's a jagged line and not a straight
Right.
line.
This is the best way to care for you. Like that's
Hmm.
we use the same language. We call it a restorative culture, not a punitive
Yep.
one. If you have
Yep.
done anything illegal and not acted out with any other people, you're going to be loved and you're going to get help.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not going to be any repercussions to your job. Now,
Hmm.
and I stood in front of our staff and I said this: if you don't come to us, we will find out. And it's not because we're bugged your phone or we're snooping. None of that is because the Bible is clear that your sin will find you out. God loves you too much to allow this to continue. And at that
Hmm.
point, you will be loved and you will get help, but we can't guarantee, depending on the nature of acting out, the safety of your position in
Hmm.
ministry. So just kind of
Yeah.
standing in front of our staff and giving that restorative culture has been huge. The number of
Yeah.
people come out. I think y'all saw that this past year.
Yeah. And I love the idea of a restorative culture because I think what can happen is if let's say your ministry is starting to develop this restorative culture, but a church that you're involved with doesn't have that culture, then that can lead people to think, I don't want the church. I don't need the church. The church is bad, but this is good for me. But then, certain things happen. They may not, I mean, I don't know about you, but there aren't that many people that are lifers with campus outreach, a lot for 5 years, less for 10 years. I mean, I've been on staff for around 25 years, and I feel like that's rare air. Um, but it has to be a culture, and it's got to be a culture that, like, that's one of the things that's exciting about the fact that we work with different ministries is because if if athletes in action and if crew and if campus outreach and the navigators and if like all of the campus ministries are trying to cultivate this and we're having conversations with churches and trying to cultivate a restorative culture, I think it really gets the church and ministries back to a place of actually living out the truth that we believe. Like we say that we're all sinful and we say that we need grace, but it's like, hey, if you did this, you should, we don't have a category for that kind of restoration. And I think that's doing a disservice to the transforming power of the gospel. Like there's a passage in First Corinthians where chapter 6, and it talks about how, you know, uh, these people won't inherit the kingdom of God. They're sexually immoral. greedy idolaters. But at the very end, he gives this list. And at the very end, he says, and such were some of you, but you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified. And I love that because he's talking to the church and he's acknowledging all these things that are sinful and bad. You were doing that. And yet you experience restoration and grace and forgiveness. And um,
Yeah,
I just
that's
think
almost
the
the
church
name
and
of the
ministries,
podcast. I bet I
yeah,
can figure out a good way to say "such were some of you" podcast, or people
yeah,
what it, because that's exactly what we're trying to develop. We're trying to develop guys who are broken sinners, just dead in their sin, that God has redeemed and is now using them to go reach broken sinners dead in their sin. And that's
mhm,
exactly what you're talking about. So I'm so glad you
yeah,
brought it up.
yeah.
Why?
And
Go ahead,
I
sorry.
think that those types of ministers are actually the most equipped to do the bread and butter of what we want, which is evangelism. So much more than the self-righteous guys who are struggling with this, but aren't being honest because they're not experiencing grace and forgiveness and restoration. They're not living the such were some of you mindset. They're living the I have to, I have to achieve and then I will be accepted.
Exactly.
Um, but if they would actually come to the light, be honest, be needy, get help, fight, take the risk and have the hard conversations, they're actually going to learn something about grace and redemption and forgiveness that is so much more attractive to the world than the world paints Christians oftentimes in media and music and whatnot as more self-righteous, I'm better than you,
I do.
type, bigoted type people. And that's should be the farthest thing from who Christians actually represent.
And what you just said is why I went all in on this. And we actually lost a lot of support and ministry partners financially because people were, and this was my fault in the beginning because I didn't do a good job explaining why is Tyler all in on getting free from people free from porn. And the reason was because of what you just said, because I saw it happen in here with Arkansas Razorbacks. I'm sitting there
Mhm,
discipling guys, and the guys that get free from porn become workhorses for the Great Commission. They're sharing their
mhm,
faith. They're making disciples. They're wanting to go overseas. They're wanting to go work for Walmart home office and go, I'm going to start a Bible study. And this is incredible. And then the other guys, we call them youth group all stars here, that have grown up in church their whole life, that are they know all the right answers to all the trivia questions. Man, they're content with it, a perfect
mhm,
attendance record. And then, I mean, I just said, hey, if we can get guys free, we're going to be crushing the Great Commission because it's the number one thing keeping people from sharing their faith. So, which is like you said, it's the bread and butter, what we're trying to get to. And when we started doing that, man, it was game over. That's why I went all in on this. And I said, well, we got to get our staff free so that
mhm,
they can multiply it on our campuses and multiply it wherever they are locally in the church.
mhm.
It's been pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. A way that I try to talk to guys about it is so many Christians, they know what grace is, but they don't know what it feels like.
There you go.
And when you're broken of your self-righteousness and you are honest about your struggle, and then you start to experience forgiveness and restoration, that's what grace feels like.
Exactly.
And when you know what it feels like, then I think you know how to give it and how to explain it more winsomely to other people. And you're right. I mean, just the number of guys, and I think women that my wife is connected to, who begin to have questions about their calling and their longevity in the ministry. And they say a number of different reasons, but at the end of the day, it's because I know that blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And my heart is not very pure. I must not see God. Therefore, I shouldn't do this thing. As opposed to, I need to fight for purity because then that's going to affect the way that I see God. And then I can actually really do this thing.
Yeah.
And
Confess your
um,
sins to one another and you will obtain mercy. That's what you just hit it. They've never experienced true grace. And that I tell my dads all the time, how does God do anything? He does it through other people. when you confess your sin to a brother, like literally, not just like, oh, kind of messed up today, but literally, I yelled at my wife, or I looked at pornography, and this is the porn I viewed, and there was masturbation included. And you receive the grace and the love, and then the correction from a brother, and you realize it's from the Lord because that guy can't give you that unless he's experienced it from the Lord as well. And it's beautiful and it's motivating. And man, I see them kind of get addicted to that. They want to go make sure other people are experiencing that freedom that they just walk in and that love that they just walk in. And
Yeah.
so they go out and start sharing the gospel like crazy. They're open and honest about with their teammates about, man, I'm struggling here. I'm getting free. Do you want to come join us? And they
Mhm.
never heard anybody talk like that. Their teammates. So
Yeah. Yeah. One other thing that, earlier you said, like, whenever you call the struggle sin, people start thinking legalism. And, I remember in college really fighting against sexual sin and temptation. And, I remember reading Every Man's Battle.
no,
That was probably the classic.
classics.
Um,
I got it
and,
right over there somewhere.
and, and then what it seemed like happened is how you're doing in the realm of sexual sin kind of became the barometer for your spiritual health. So it's like, okay, let's not focus on this. We're not focusing on pride this way. We're not. Jerry Bridges wrote a book called Respectable Sins, and it was like, what about all these respectable sins? And I think that kind of swung the pendulum a little bit to say, let's be more gracious. Let's not crack down. Let's not make sexual sin and struggle as big of a deal. And little did we know that as that shift is starting to happen, I think in like campus ministry circles, that's when the rise of the internet and the iPhone and all that was kind of going up to make it all that much more accessible. So it's increasing at the time that the pendulum is swinging to let's not talk about this as much because we don't want to be legalistic. And so now I think as we're talking about it, it's not, uh-oh, the pendulum is swinging back and we're trying to be legalistic. It's like, no, I think there's a legalistic would be we're just finding people who are struggling and then we're just booting them, off the island, so to speak. What we're going to do is to be serious about the fight against sin while also being really serious about what grace feels like and what redemption looks like. And if we can be really serious about it and we can be restorative, that's what's going to be the fuel for these guys to keep ministering for, the next decade, which is what all campus ministries need is longevity of leaders. And after you work through sin and you've been on staff for a long time, that's when you have so much to give to the younger generation. But it's going to require, not just being gracious at the expense of holiness, but not just fighting for purity at the expense of grace. But it's like these things don't have to be separated. It's not an either or.
I love asking this question. Um, and I tell any disciples to learn to ask this question when they meet an older godly man, just walk up to him and go, what happened to you? Because they'll have a story. And it usually revolves around great pain and suffering and crushing of sin. And then that's why they exude humility and competence hand in hand at the same time. And they
Mhm.
are kind and they are driven at the same time for the Lord's kingdom. So, and then I love that you talk about self righteousness. These guys who, it is exactly what it is self righteousness. If my students knew this about me, then God couldn't move in their lives. I
Mhm.
mean, that's the definition of self righteous. Like, if it's all centered around me, if they knew that I struggled with this, then they'll never get free from
Mhm.
it. It's
Yeah.
ludicrous. It's crazy according to scripture, right? So, man, I'm so glad you brought that up. Well, good news. That is just part one of my interview with Paul Poteat of Campus Outreach. So I hope you will check back next week as we do part two, where we talk about women ministering to the other women that are in sexual brokenness. And I think you'll be very encouraged by the content. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next week.